So good morning once again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for a very important topic, from idea to business, basic first steps for successful entrepreneurship, a priority for many entrepreneurs who intend to start a business or who are in the early stages of starting a business. My name is Angela White. I am Senior Manager, Small Business Initiatives at RBC Royal Bank. My job is to understand the needs of small business, researching emerging trends and best practices to identify solutions that enable the growth of our small business clients. I'm also responsible for our Small Business Newcomer program, which aims to understand the unique needs of Canadians, new Canadians, who want to start a business in Canada. Today's webinar is an example of our response to feedback on the importance of providing access to tangible best practices in the early stages of starting a business that help businesses make informed decisions. As a leader in the financial services sector and in the wider Canadian business community, and as a loyal supporter of newcomers to Canada for over 145 years, RBC is proud to sponsor this webinar, and we are honored to do so with our host, Hire Immigrants at the Global Diversity Exchange, a think and do tank at Ryerson University's Ted Rogers School of Management. Hire Immigrants provides a platform for employers and entrepreneurs to find and share practical solutions for the types of challenges we're talking about today. RBC Royal Bank and Hire Immigrants recognize that setting up newcomer entrepreneurs for success makes sense for our economy and for our communities. And we also know that immigrants are entrepreneurial. Immigrants to Canada are major contributors to business creation and start businesses at a much faster rate than non-immigrants, with many thriving as small business owners across various sectors and industries. And to those listening today who are not immigrants, we are so glad that you could be here as well, as your contributions are invaluable. We recognize that getting the right information, resources, and tools can have a significant and lasting impact on the success of any entrepreneur. Today's webinar topic will cover some of those basic but essential first steps. Talking to subject matter experts is a great start, and the two experts joining us today will share their knowledge and expertise on what you need to know to get started. Dominic Longcar is the entrepreneur in residence at Futurpreneur Canada, a national non-profit organization that provides financing, mentoring, and support tools to aspiring business owners aged 18 to 39. Dominic has helped over 200 startup businesses get off the ground. Nicholas Wellham, a sales manager small business at RBC Royal Bank. He leads a team of account managers who cultivate relationships with startups and companies with revenues of 0 to 5 million. Welcome, Dominic and Nick. Before we begin, a quick word about who else is in this virtual room. There are over 100 participants registered. We have with us entrepreneurs and service providers. We are a primarily Canadian group with some of our international members joining us. Welcome to our Canadian participants, some returning and some new, and welcome to our international colleagues and participants. We'll first hear briefly from each of our presenters, then we'll open up to you, our listeners, for a moderated question and answer period. So let's begin with Dominic, who will tell us about the important things to consider when turning an idea into a business.
Thank you, Angela, and welcome everyone. This is Dominic speaking here at the offices here at Futurpreneur Canada. What I wanted to do is just start off, and you'll see the first thing on the slide there is an idea is not a business. And I like to always start that by letting entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs know that an idea is a starting point. And in my experience, it's really about the fine-tuning. It's about the implementation. And you know, I think, I use the analogy whenever you start a business or considering starting a business and passionate about it is, it's like falling in love, you know, when you're kind of madly in love with the person, you know, for a business, it's just that you're falling in love with the idea, the concept of the business. So there has to be some stepping back, and you'll notice the next couple of bullet points, the competition and experience. I think this is sort of standard to know the competition, but really if you have no access to them or it's difficult, then get out there and join an association, network in the association, talk to people who are in the industry. Really, as much as possible, you really need to know the industry inside out, and I usually say before you can break the rules, you need to know what the rules are. Obviously get experience, and again, if you can't volunteer, get out there and talk to people. And if you do talk to people, just be prepared with your questions. Later on, we'll talk a bit more about the context in Canada. You'll notice here, as well as the target client, one of the things I spend 50% of my time doing in the initial phases is reminding would-be entrepreneurs to go niche, go specific, think about their best customer. Not, you know, the worst answer you can tell anyone is I serve anyone and everybody that wants my product or service. It's really about being much more niche and much more specific in the kind of what I call your best customer, your ideal client. And that means talking a bit more about their persona, who they are, how they walk, how they talk. And of course, you may not know this from the start, but start thinking in those terms. Don't be afraid to be exclusive. Oh, and one last side thing, please don't sell on price, even if you sell on price. And of course, we can save that for later, but that's a big pet peeve of mine. I find that too many people are leading with price as their main lead of their key benefit. Other things to think about is start assembling knowledgeable people. Let's face it, all of us get advice, and everybody likes to play the armchair entrepreneur and give us advice in marketing because it's easy and free. And I always let people know, you know, just be careful where you're getting advice from, not because it can't be helpful, but because we all have biases and sometimes we just don't have that experience.
Dominic, it's Angela. Sorry for the interruption. I believe that you might be cutting in and out. Just want to make you aware of that.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So hopefully it's... so sorry, maybe it's the technology that we have here. So what I'll do is I'll speak even slower. I know I tend to speak fast. So, and one thing to keep in mind here is the last piece is that this should be a fit in your life now. Sometimes entrepreneurs are told there's great opportunities out there, which there are. But it's really important to look into your current situation. And that doesn't mean just where your financial situation is, but your commitments. Do you have any outstanding commitments? Let's face it, if you've got a family and a mortgage and there's so many things going on, it's different than if you have less commitments. And this includes being active and doing other things. So these are just some things to consider in terms of when you should start a business. Yes, look at opportunities, but also make sure the timing is right in terms of your own life. So what I'd like to do at this point is to pass this over to Angela.
Thanks so much, Dominic. And just before Nick steps in to make a few comments, there's a couple of things I wanted to just quickly acknowledge. I think it's a really important point that Dominic makes about knowing your target client. And what I like to say is important to think about, based on the product or service that you're trying to sell, who is the right client that actually wants to buy that product and service. So I think it's a great point Dominic makes that it's not about being, selling a product across or making it available to everyone. It's okay to be exclusive. And the research that you do in planning to start a business helps you to really narrow that focus and get really clear about who that target client is that's going to be interested in the product and service that you're trying to sell. And just finally, the comment that Dominic made about leading with price and the importance of differentiating your business is critical as well. You need to stand out in this world of competition so that people really know why they would go to you versus someone else or versus your competitor. So thank you for your comments, Dominic. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, both Angela and Dominic, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I think where I will dive a little bit more deeply before we move on with the presentation is on the two specific points of the business plan considerations that you see midway through the slide there, and then just a couple more down, the points about assembling that team of advisors, both formal and informal around you, and the role that they can play for you and with you. But before I do that, in speaking with Dominic, I love the way that he always begins these presentations with the notion or the concept that the idea doesn't equal the business. And I think we can all appreciate that point. To take that a little further, the phrase that I sometimes like to use with people that I meet and converse with is that the business that you create is the idea that you've brought to life, and you get to that life stage through execution. So Dominic spoke about implementation. I speak about execution. They're obviously very closely correlated. And it's within the context of the business plan where you have the opportunity to think a lot about how you're going to go about the execution. It contains both the what you need to do, but also the how you're going to go about doing it. So the first point I usually make about business plans is a lot of the value that can be derived from it sometimes comes from the timing of when it's actually completed. I find that some folks either jump in a little bit too early where they haven't given their idea enough time to really ruminate and start to form itself into a concept that you think can reasonably be commercialized. And at the other end of the spectrum, sometimes we wait a little bit too long, and we don't write a business plan until we've actually already opened up our doors, or we never write a business plan at all. Now, the value of going through the planning process is that, as I sort of alluded to before, it does allow you to think through the idea. It allows you to fine-tune some of what you're wanting to approach, as Dominic mentioned. And it gives you a time and a place to do all of that before you get swept up in the day-to-day of actually operating and running your business. So very quickly, I just wanted to run through some of the key high-level subject areas that I've always found valuable to include in your plan. You're going to want to start off by just simply describing what it is that you're looking to accomplish. I know it may sound a little basic or straightforward, but the more clearly we can define what it is we're trying to accomplish, the more direction we will have for ourselves as we pursue this idea. As Dominic mentioned, we're going to want to talk about our ideal target clients. We're going to want to research the marketplace that we're looking to enter and the competitors that we're going to face. How does our value proposition differ from theirs? Are we competing on price or quality or service or even an ability to innovate? Talk about what your business model, how are you going to deliver your product or your service? Where are you going to do it from? Who are you going to source your supply from? And what sort of a labor force do you need to employ in order to appropriately deliver your product or service? You're also going to want to speak to your financing needs, and I won't go into detail here because we have another slide dedicated to this, but you're going to want to know and figure out how much cash funding you're going to need to start and run your business going forward. And then finally, with respect to the advisory team, because that's the second major point that I wanted to make, and Dominic did touch on it, I find that it's critically important to have a team around you, whether they are employed in your business or professional advisors such as your banking account manager or your accountant or your lawyer. What I sometimes encounter is that new business owners hesitate to reach out to folks and form a team around them. They don't feel that they're yet in the position to have these folks in their life and in their business and in a position to provide advice. And I always tell people the sooner the absolute better. You know, as a business owner, you wear many, many hats, and you have a lot to think about. So the more experts and specialists that you can have around you, whether it's a mentor, even a supplier, your banker, your accountant, the better off you'll be positioned.
Thank you so much for those comments, Nick. And you know, a couple of things that really resonated as you were speaking. Certainly the importance of a business plan, but to make sure that, you know, everyone understands that that business plan is not only written, it's not written once. It's something that you revisit over and over again as you see changes in your industry, changes in the market. You might decide to you know, start offering an additional or different product or service. And so this is a document that you want to continue to use and update and revise as needed and as you see changes in your business. And in terms of assembling a team of advisors, another fantastic and critical component of business planning that Nick talked about, and the importance of proactively seeking out advisors and peers in your industry, other business owners like you or others that are thinking of starting businesses like you in similar industries like you. They may be competitors, but interestingly enough, they are important consultants and advisors that you want to have in your network. So thank you so much for that feedback. Any final comments, Dominic and Nick, before we move forward?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, and we're going to now talk about financing your business idea and the options that are available, and Nick is going to start us off.
Thank you, Angela. Financing is quite obviously a critical issue. I'm sure that everyone appreciates that and knows that no business can come to life and no business can be sustainable, certainly without adequate funding. The specific bullet points that we have for you today on the slide are, or they speak to the where. So where can we source financing or funding from? What form does it take? But if you'll indulge me for just a moment, I actually wanted to back up one quick step and actually talk about the how much before we get to the where. How much financing, how much cash do we need to start and then run our business? And this is a question that you and we will all explore in more detail as we go through that business planning process, as it starts to become a little bit more clear around what it is you're going to do and where and when there will be financing needs associated with each one of those steps and items. And so it's here where we will talk about the how much. Now, I usually chunk off the how much into three broader categories: your startup costs, your ongoing cash flow needs, and then finally, where is your break-even point? The startup costs are usually, in my experience, where we tend to spend most of our focus. And I think rightfully so. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. We can't get to the point where we open our doors and start to welcome in customers unless we have adequate financing to allow us to do that. But sort of as a prelude to what I'm going to talk about with ongoing cash flow needs, I always impress upon people to make sure that we're thinking about both the startup costs as well as the ongoing cash flow. So your startup costs could be anything from initial inventory that you may need, different types of equipment that you might need to purchase, any sort of leasehold improvements or changes that you might need to make to your office space, or warehouse space, depending on the type and nature of business. It could include the recruitment of employees or licenses that you have to purchase. I think the moral of the story is that there's a laundry list of them, and we need to specify them and quantify them as we are going through the business planning process. Once we have a handle on what it's going to cost us to actually open up our doors and start to run the business, we then need to move to, well, what sort of cash needs is my business, my company going to have on an ongoing basis? And this is typically where we get into the exercise of producing a cash flow forecast or producing several different iterations of a cash flow forecast. And really what we're trying to nail down or quantify is what is the cash that I have on hand from various sources of financing, as well as the cash that I think I'm going to be able to pull in from the sales that I make, and is that going to be sufficient, particularly in the early days, to cover off all of the different cash expenses that I'm going to have, be it to pay my rent or my employees, or even capital expenditures if you happen to be a business that has equipment needs. And so this is where we start to also think about things like the turnover of your receivables and how quickly you're able to sell your inventory, and how long you can wait before you pay some of your bills to some of your suppliers. There's a lot of information to digest, and so I'm going to leave it there just so we keep it a little bit more high level. But the real key point that I want to make is that in addition to the startup costs, we really need to start to wrap our minds around what are my cash flow needs on a day-to-day basis going forward to ensure that I'm able to keep my doors open. So that's the how much. The where, which speaks to all of the various bullet points that we have on the slide, is who and how, who can I engage and how can I finance my business. Oftentimes it's a combination of equity and debt. And most small businesses, certainly startups, will receive some, if not all, of their initial funding from equity. And a lot of that will come from either the owner, him or herself, or family and friends. The second bullet point that we have there regarding investors, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because it can be a little bit difficult to source investors for early stage smaller businesses, and a lot of it can also have to do with the type of business. Is it in a niche? Is it in a particular industry vertical? So what I wanted to do is then jump immediately into the conversation around debt. And the key point that I wanted to make here is that there are several different sources of debt. It's not just from a bank that you're able to source debt. It can be from banks. It can be from the government. It can be from individuals, be they family members or other folks who happen to have an interest in your business and think you've got a good idea on your hands. And one of the areas that we often overlook are our suppliers. Trade credit can oftentimes be an important source of financing for a business in its early days, to allow you to keep a little additional cash in your bank account as you look to get your business up and running. If I can, as an employee of a bank, quite obviously, I wanted to jump back to that specific piece before I hand it off to Dominic, and just walk people through what some of the important pieces of information are when approaching your banker, because it's never too early to approach your banking advisor. These are folks who are experienced and knowledgeable. They've dealt with startups before. They're knowledgeable not just about bank programs, but also non-bank programs. And so they're a critical individual to have in the process, and as early as possible in the process. And when you approach them, you want to come prepared with your business plan, your forecast and projections, some sort of a conversation around any fallback resources that you may have or have access to, the experience that you bring and what's going to make you successful in this venture. And as early as possible, connect your banker with the other advisors that you have as part of your team, whether it's a mentor that you have in the industry or the accountants that you've hired to work with you. These are folks who can work together as well as with you to help source all possible solutions that are out there in the marketplace for you.
Nick, thank you so very much. There are so many critical points that you just made, you know, and I'll start with the last one. We talked about on the first slide the importance of having a network of consultants and mentors, et cetera, and your banker absolutely is one of those that you want to have in your network, and could even be someone that you consult with as part of your business planning preparation and research. So thank you for mentioning that. The second point I'll make, and I'll turn it over to Dominic for comments. Thank you so much for all of your focus around cash and being clear around the cash flow that you're going to need. And I like to say the important point there is remembering that to keep the doors open, especially in those early stages, requires cash. And sometimes, or perhaps even all the time, I should say, you almost need to think when you're starting that new business of, do I have enough cash on hand to keep those doors open for 30, 60, 90 or more days if no one walks in the door in those first few months? Do I have enough cash while I get that business up and running, while I build a client base, while I increase awareness of my business and people get to know who I am, where I am, what I do, what I have to offer? So really critical comments in terms of cash and its importance, and building that cash flow forecast is part of your business planning. Dominic, additional comments from you?
Yes, thank you, Angela. One of the things I just want to lead off where Nicholas sort of started it, and that is, as much as possible, when you're looking for startup costs, be specific. Know exactly what that money is going to help you do, because remember, you're going to get a loan. Certainly there are other programs out there, and you'll see at the slide that we have at the end, there's canadabusiness.ca, and if you go on there, you can type in your business under program, and it'll spit out about 30 to 40 different programs out there. And what you'll find is that most of those things won't apply to you as an entrepreneur. You know, there's various programs, and be very, very careful about looking for grants. My experience is they're very few and far between. So when you're looking at grants, be very mindful that it's tough to get them. There are, without going into a lot of detail, you can get a grant, some grants that are really small, and then the bigger grants are ones where there's enough sales or traction, and you're doing some high technology or something very specific, and you've demonstrated that. So there's a tool for you to take a look at what's available, but really the most important piece of all is make sure you understand what the money is going to be used for to move your business forward. Try to minimize using a lot of the money for day-to-day expenses, right? One of the things that you want to do for the startup cost is to use it for assets, for example, for the equipment, because you really need that, for a good marketing program, because that'll move your business forward. Anything you can do to minimize spending a lot of money up front is going to be crucial. However, what is important, I think that was mentioned from Nicholas and Angela, is you really need to pay attention once it gets up and running. So what's going to be the minimum base of expenses that are going to go through your hands? And never confuse doing the cash flow or understanding cash flow from getting an accountant or a bookkeeper. You as an entrepreneur need to be versatile, need to know about cash flow, which to me is another word for budgeting. Right? When you really think of it, it's a basic term. Sometimes entrepreneurs start and they say, oh, this is something I'll just get my accountant to do or my bookkeeper. You as an entrepreneur need to know that, because I can guarantee you, and Nicholas will probably be asking you direct questions when you come to the bank. The same thing with us at Futurpreneur. Again, you can take a look at what we do, but really we're geared towards helping entrepreneurs between 18 and 39. And we're another resource. Again, these are all resources. RBC, Futurpreneur, these are resources that you need to investigate to see if this applies to you. So I'll leave it at that at this point, only because of time. But one last thing that that's really important that I see all the time happening is make sure that when you're looking for financing, we know the reality. The reality is we're all stretched for cash. You'll be stretched for cash as an entrepreneur. And so always keep in mind that for you, it's important to manage your own cash personally. because believe it or not, that's going to have an effect on your business. It doesn't matter what you do, whether you incorporate or do a sole proprietorship. Your personal history with cash and how you handle it will have an effect on your business because everybody dips into that and sees that. So be mindful that this is where things start to interrelate, and this is something that sometimes entrepreneurs forget. You can't separate your personal financial life with your business life. They're closely intertwined.
Thanks, Dominic, for this feedback. And one of the things that I want to add before we move to the next slide, I mean, this was all about a conversation on access to financing. And we've talked about as well the importance of business planning. And there's a connection in the sense that you can increase your access to financing if you're well planned, if you're well prepared, if you know, to Dominic's point, what you need, what money you need, and how you want to use that money, and be able to articulate that to whomever you're requesting financing from. That demonstrates your business to be viable, that demonstrates you to know what you're doing, why you're starting this business, your capability to run and manage that business. All of that is important to being able to increase your access to financing and really increase confidence in the people that you're asking for money, increase their confidence that, yes, you do know what you're doing. You didn't just have an idea. You actually took some time to plan it out, and you are prepared to execute on it. So thank you so much, Dominic and Nick, for those important comments around financing. We will move to the next slide. So now we're going to talk a bit about the common challenges to expect when you first launch a business, and I'm going to start with you, Dominic.
Thank you, Angela. So imagine for a minute now you've got your financing, you've started your business, you're up and running. One of the things that is really important to differentiate, in my view, is sales versus marketing. There are so many entrepreneurs when they start, they want to focus a lot on marketing. By marketing, I mean they talk about their brand as if it exists, and a brand is a reputation. So I usually get entrepreneurs to really focus on sales. That is going deep and narrow, building your sales one customer at a time, as opposed to spending a lot of money up front developing what a lot of people call a brand presence. And that means they want to spend a lot of money on their website. They want to spend a lot of money on using Google Ads, for example. Sometimes that may not be the best idea at that time. Don't get me wrong, that can happen as time goes on, but really it's much more important to think about sales because that's really going to make this tick. Because you can see the next point, which is developing a steady flow of work. And that means is that part of being an entrepreneur is to balance the long-term vision that you had with the short-term sales. And to me, it's really about being as niche as you possibly can. But by that I mean is that if we go back to the original comment that I made when I started, is that if you want to, and this happens a lot, where entrepreneurs start with, for example, they want to start a shoe store that specializes in high-end Italian shoes, and then all of a sudden they get requests to carry other shoes. You can start to be teared away and offer too many services and products that really don't fit your core. And as an entrepreneur, I think it's really important to go back to your core and offer that and stay really focused on that. As I said to you at the beginning of this conversation, half my job is reminding entrepreneurs to go back to their niche when they're starting out. So that to me is a really, really important element here. In terms of time and how you spend your time, to me, what's important in the beginning is a lot of the things that we do as an entrepreneur, because you're your own boss, so it's very easy to do things that you're comfortable with. Really watch where you spend your time, and that to me means doing some of the uncomfortable things. Uncomfortable means maybe you need to network more, maybe you're not doing that. Doing things where you're going to be in front of your clients, what I call your visibility program. So sometimes people spend a lot of time, again, talking about marketing, and I talk about visibility. What is your visibility program? How are you getting in front of clients? The other thing to keep in mind here is to start developing, and I think this was alluded to before by Nicholas, start developing a network base. look at successful entrepreneurs, you'll find that they have a network base. And I know many of you listening in, you may be newcomers to Canada, but look at developing, and it doesn't have to be in your industry. It can be any successful entrepreneur. It can be any professional, right? It's really about developing a network base that you can grow and ask for referrals or ask for people who they know. You know, this is what's called in business terms influencers. So the more you can start looking at that and growing that, the more beneficial you'll be as an entrepreneur when you start up, because that's going to be crucial when you get up. It doesn't really matter if you're doing an online business or a retail business or business to business. Networking is still a critical component, and having a network base is really fundamental. So I will turn this over back to you, Angela.
Well, thank you so much, Dominic, for those comments, and I'm gonna go straight to Nick for any additional that he would like to make.
Yes, I will be very brief because we do want to be conscious of time. It's incredibly important that we get to your Q&A so we hear directly from you. So very quickly, with respect to the sales versus marketing, as Dominic said, the marketing piece is incredibly important, and particularly with advances in technology these days, there are almost, there are too many ways to count that you can go out and make yourself known to the marketplace. And so it is important, and you have to spend time there. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to speak to where your sales are going to come from. Who are you going to sell to? Why are they going to buy from you? And when do you think it's reasonably going to be? When do you reasonably think it's going to happen? It really is critical to make this distinction between sales and marketing. With respect to the steady flow of work, the angle that I typically take with respect to this topic is related to the cash flow cycle of your business. So depending on what it is that you produce and sell, do you have a long sales cycle? Do you need to hold a lot of inventory? Is there any sort of seasonality in your business where you sell more in one part of the year versus another? Do you happen to employ more full-time versus part-time folks, or vice versa? There are a number of other issues that we could go through, but all of them have an impact on the amount of cash that your company is going to consume. And so if you do have a long sales cycle, for instance, we need to be able to identify how you're going to be able to meet your company's expenses while you are in between sales. I'm going to jump to prioritize your time. You wear many hats as a business owner, and Dominic hit the nail on the head. You are responsible and have to be responsible to each of the major tasks. You're the CEO, CFO, Chief Marketing and Sales Officer, etc. But this is where you can and need to employ the services of all of those various advisors that you surround yourself with. And then finally, with respect to cash flow management, because we've been touching on that quite a bit, the key message that I would leave you with is that there are tools and there are people that can help you with it. So it's not just about you sitting down by yourself and trying to plan for it, as you well should, but there are people and there are things out there that can help you accomplish that. Angela?
Thank you both so very much, and we're just going to take one more minute or two to talk about, to the next slide, please, challenges specific to newcomer entrepreneurs, and then we will start to take your questions. So, Nick, I'm going to start with you.
Wonderful, and I think what I will do is I'll jump to the bottom of the slide for the access to financing piece before turning it over to Dominic. We alluded to this a little bit earlier, but for newcomers specifically, it can sometimes be a little bit more challenging to access financing, just given the fact that they don't have a credit history in Canada. And so the credit history, both personal and business, is one of the key topics that you're going to want to think about and talk to your bank about. There are programs and offers that exist in the marketplace specifically for newcomers, but it's critically important that we start building your credit history as early as possible. And that can be accomplished with a small loan, a small credit card for your business. It's important to keep track of your history and consolidate debts where possible, because your credit history is what it really is your pattern of repayment behavior. And so long as it remains positive, you'll be in a really strong position to access financing from a variety of sources.
Dominic?
Sure, and again, building on what Nicholas had mentioned, yeah, the importance of building that credit history as soon as you can, regardless. The other thing I wanted to really touch on, because I think this is important for the people that are listening, in terms of the Canadian business culture. And one of the difference that I see with a lot of clients that come in are what I call low context culture, which is Canada. As opposed to other cultures such as Mexico or even out in Asia, where there's a more need for community building, socializing beforehand. So the good news, on the one hand, here in Canada, for the most part, is that you just need to be direct and clear with whoever you want to start talking to or building some kind of professional rapport here in Canada. Then after that, you can start looking at developing a bit of more of a social or intimate basis. So it's almost, I find, if we're going to generalize, it's almost the reverse in terms of the climate, the business climate. Get down to business, be clear, be specific, and later on when you get to know people, obviously you need to start sharing some common interest because that's how things work. The other thing I wanted to add is that because we're less formal than I find in other cultures, you can go by a first name basis. You don't need something exuberant. You don't need to have gifts or take people to expensive lunches. And I think, yes, everyone is busy. And what I tell entrepreneurs, just be persistent, be polite, and you'll amaze what you can do. I'm always amazed that people don't contact me anymore, even though I offer that. And of course, the obvious is keep practicing English. If you're a newcomer, get yourself involved out there. There are meetup groups, there are events, there are networking events, there are ways to get out there and connect with others and use that to your advantage. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Dominic and Nick, for sharing the important steps from idea to business, in particular the value of a business plan as the blueprint for success, which is what I like to call it, because it forces a look at the market, cash flow, the right structure for your business, the competition, the target client, the support network that you need to have in place, how the business will be financed, including the need for property, equipment, leasehold improvements, all addressing the ultimate goal, which is to build, distribute, or sell a product or service that your target customer wants and is willing to pay for. So it's now time for the Q&A session where your participation will be needed. Please now move from the chat box and submit your questions into the Q&A box. And I'm going to get us started with the first question. So Dominic, thinking about the steps from idea to business that increase the likelihood of building a successful business, all the steps that you and Nick were just talking about and sharing, in your experience, which of these steps often get missed? And why is that? And what is the impact to that misstep?
So in my experience, one of the steps is the quickness to market without doing proper market research. I usually, as I mentioned before, I'll tell entrepreneurs, act your stage. So are you in the discovery stage? Are you in the development stage? Are you in the launch stage? And this includes especially for those of you who are, for example, developing a prototype. I see people with software. In many instances, there's going to be very few government funding or sources of financing if you're still just developing a prototype of a software, right? This is going to be difficult to get financing up front. So you need to know what stage you're at, and therefore how you approach us or anyone for that matter, or you'll get a different response, and you'll be prepared to know what you can expect. So to me, it's really not understanding what stage you're at, and then developing the resources and energy to stay in that stage. It would be one of my major ones that I see happen all the time.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Well, the one that I always bring up, and forgive me for jumping ahead, but I couldn't help notice a question from Veronica where she asked about where you can get free advice from. The step that I most frequently see skipped is that seeking of advice. I think business owners, and rightfully so, get wrapped up in everything that they have to get done, and much of the responsibility lies on their shoulder. They forget to reach out, or they may not know where exactly to reach out. And so to Veronica's specific question, there are a lot of great areas where you can receive free advice. You certainly can walk into your bank and speak with your banking advisor and have a really knowledgeable and deep conversation that isn't going to cost you anything. You can attend a whole variety of different events or conferences that might be sponsored by a trade association or a chamber of commerce. It's a great way to network and meet people who are in the industry vertical so that you can seek advice and counsel that way from folks who have already been successful in the business or in a similar business. So that would be the piece that I would highlight.
Thank you so much for that, Nick and Dominic. And we have another question from Zaid. If a startup project chose to be based in Regina, Saskatchewan, would that affect the scale and availability of financing options? I'm going to start with you, Nick.
The short answer would be no. The physical location, generally speaking, shouldn't have a significant impact on the amount or type of financing that you'd have access to. A place like Regina, Saskatchewan is going to have all of the major banks present. There will be government grants or programs or lending programs that would be available to you in that particular province. There may be or will likely be specific programs to that province that are available to an owner and his or her business. So my short answer would be no.
Thanks so much. And Dominic, I'm going to turn it over to you to make a comment as well. You've heard Nick talk a lot about financing and the importance of going to your banker, and your banker can also sometimes introduce or refer you to other sources other than a bank where it makes sense. So Futurpreneur is certainly one of those partners that have the ability to help. Any comment from you, Dominic?
Yeah, and again, as you mentioned, Futurpreneur has offices all across Canada, just like RBC does. So I find in the initial stages, no. Later on, maybe as you get bigger and grow, but the initial stages, I don't. And as a matter of fact, you may find that, let's say you're based down in Saskatchewan, you may have some specific programs that are geared. So by provinces, there's some focus in some types of businesses and industries that, in fact, may be to your advantage at times as well.
Thank you so much. So we've got some more questions building here, so I'm going to try to get to a couple more. Matt is asking, how can we predict cash flow? Nick?
Really wonderful question. It can be an intensive process, but it's also a very enlightening process. And I think once you've gotten your head around where your cash flow comes from, and how often and what your cash expenses, your cash responsibilities are, you'll be in a far more comfortable place from a business owner perspective. So how can you start to quantify that? A lot of that will be related to the type of business that you own and operate. If just by way of example, if you happen to be a retail store, you are in all likelihood collecting cash on the same day that you're making a sale. So in that instance, it's going to be relatively straightforward. In most cases, a sale is going to equal cash, and then it becomes a matter of identifying the expenses that you have to make on a weekly or a monthly basis, be they to employees or suppliers. It becomes a bit more of a complicated process if you happen to provide a service or a product where you sell on credit terms. So you provide a product or service today, but you don't actually collect any cash payment for that product or service until some point in the future, whether it's 30 or 60 or 90 days in some cases. And so in cases like that, you're going to want to go through an exercise where you know how long it takes before you receive the cash. B, how long you're holding your product in inventory before you're able to sell it. And then thirdly, quantify how often you have to pay all of your various bills. There, in all likelihood, will be a gap, i.e., you have to pay more bills more quickly than you're able to collect cash for services or products rendered, and that gap is most often filled by some form of financing. So that would be the way that I would address that question.
great feedback. Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Sarah Thompson, St. John's Association for New Canadians. You mentioned the importance of being exclusive when thinking about your target client. I am trying to read the rest of that question. I think it's, would a financial advisor of my bank provide a comprehensive, I'm going to ask Devin or Fatma. I'm not seeing the full question for Sarah. It looks like it might be a little bit cut off. I'm sorry about that, Sarah. I'm not seeing your full question. I'm going to go to just give me one moment, please. Okay. So you mentioned the importance of being exclusive when thinking about your target client. Would a financial advisor of my bank provide a comprehensive package of guidance, business plan, funds needed? If I have the idea, I'm gonna ask Nick to answer that question. Would a financial advisor of my bank be able to provide a comprehensive package of guidance, business planning, funds needed, etc.?
Certainly. I think that was actually Haneen's question.
I believe it might be, yes.
The very brief response to that would be there is a really great role that your banking advisor can play there. Your banking advisor can provide you with a business plan template. They can speak to you about common questions and subject areas that a banker and others are going to want to learn more about from you. So they can play an important role. But I would say that there will also be an expectation that you as the business owner would have been thinking through many of these questions and would come with some level of preparation before having a conversation with someone like a banking advisor.
Thank you so much. Just to go back to Sarah's, at the end of your question, my apologies, Sarah, that I now have that. Would you, so the question is, you mentioned the importance of being exclusive when thinking about your target client. Would you say that it is true for businesses in smaller communities, a small population base already narrows your potential customers? Dominic.
Yes, so that still applies. However, there's some caveat. Obviously, if I'm setting up a bookstore in a very, very small community that won't support that, that's a different story. It'll be a question of, can this support this? In my experience, when you're starting out, usually there is enough of a base, right? You know, some of you may have heard the book 1,000 Fans. And what you're trying to do when you start is to get up to your first base of customers. Usually that's doable in most businesses. Like I've said, once in a while, excuse me, it can happen that you are so niche and too tight that you're going to need to expand on that base. But generally speaking, absolutely, that's where I would start, by being exclusive and using the same principles.
Thank you so very much for that. It is 11:55. And we are almost at the end. I'm just going to go ahead and take one quick question and just ask us to be very brief with our response. I'm visiting Canada for the first time. My business is in Nigeria, after school programs for children and various competitions for children. Where would I go to find my competition? And I'm going to end with that question. Dominic, any thoughts on that?
Where would you go for the competition? Well, you know, I'm assuming that her business is going to be based in Nigeria, so I need to ask that question, right? Because she's Canada here, so I guess I'm trying to understand, is she providing the programs in Nigeria or in Canada? And I think that's kind of something that I'm not clear about, right?
So I guess in the interest of time, perhaps we'll take that one offline. It is 11:56. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. We have come to the end, and certainly hope that you found this to be a useful use of your time. Thank you for your engagement and your participation and your questions. We really appreciate it. Sincere thanks to Nicholas and Dominic for such an informative exchange of information, tips, and ideas. On the webinar recording and once the webinar recording and downloadable resources are available, you'll be notified via email. These resources will be made available at www.hireimmigrants.ca. So please bookmark the page and share it with your colleagues and networks. There's just a wealth of information at the hireimmigrants.ca site, including information for entrepreneurs. So we really invite you to take some time and visit the site and get familiar with the information at that site. To our audience in Canada and beyond, we'd like to hear your stories and share more good practices, so please stay connected with us. And finally, before I let you go, our team values your feedback, and we'd like to hear your thoughts on today's session. So please complete our online evaluation by clicking the link on your screen or in your email, and hopefully you can all see the Take This Survey link. And that's it for our webinar today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your Friday, and have a fantastic weekend. Thank you.